Now, at the festival, the governor was accustomed to release a prisoner for the crowd, anyone whom they wanted. At that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Jesus Barabbas. So after they had gathered, Pilate said to them,
"Whom do you want me to release for you, Jesus Barabbas, or Jesus who is called the Messiah?"
For he realized that it was out of jealousy that they had handed him over. While he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him,
"Have nothing to do with that innocent man, for today I have suffered a great deal because of a dream about him."
Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus killed. The governor again said to them,
"Which of the two do you want me to release for you?"
And they said,
Barabbas.
Pilate said to them,
"Then, what should I do with Jesus who is called the Messiah?"
All of them said,
Let him be crucified.
Then he asked,
"Why? What evil has he done?"
but they shouted all the more.
Let him be crucified.
So when Pilate saw that he could do nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took some water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying,
"I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves."
Then the people as a whole answered,
His blood be on us and on our children.
So he released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified.
If Judas has become synonymous with betrayal, Pontius Pilate is typecast as a coward, a man who knew Jesus was innocent and yet tried to wash his hands of his blood. I've always had a fair amount of sympathy for Pilate. He stood here in Matthew 27 before an angry mob, baying for the blood of Jesus. They're crying out for the release of Barabbas, this notorious criminal. The pressure in that moment would have been enormous. And yet if we look carefully at this section of the story, my sympathy starts to fade away. Who is Jesus for Pilate? Well, we see here what he knows about Jesus. In verse 18, we see he realizes that it was out of jealousy that the religious establishment have handed him over for execution. We see his wife send a message proclaiming Jesus as that innocent man. She urges Pilate to have nothing to do with him. We see that he himself knows Jesus has done no wrong. When bemused, he asks the crowd, why? What evil has he done? Pilate knows Jesus does not deserve the death penalty. He knows Jesus is innocent, and yet we get this extraordinary moment when he symbolically washes his hands before the mob and says, I am innocent of this man's blood. What he's done, he's climbed onto the metaphorical fence and he's perched himself there, unwilling to commit one way or another. He knows Jesus is not guilty, and yet he knows he'll have a riot on his hands with this angry mob if he lets him go. And so he sits on the fence. Are you on the fence when it comes to the identity of Jesus? Perhaps you know who he is. You know deep down he is the Son of God, just like he claims. He's a good guy. He has something interesting to say every now and again. He's worth a prayer when you're in a pinch. But actually living life as one of his followers, letting him shape our lives and our future, and publicly, that's out of the question. We'd cop too much flack for that. Maybe we're on the fence. Here's the thing about Jesus, though. Earlier in Matthew's Gospel, he said there are no fences. Matthew 12, verse 30, he says, whoever is not with me is against me, and whoever does not gather with me scatters. We're either for Jesus or we're against him. Pilate plays that out for us. He's washed his hands. He's innocent of this man's blood, and yet in a heartbeat later, verse 26, he released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified. How's that for innocence? Flogging Jesus, having him whipped with leather straps, embedded with lead balls and shards of bone, to soften his flesh before the crucifixion that he then sanctions when he hands Jesus over? Does that sound like innocence to you? We can't sit on the fence with Jesus. We have to go one way or another with him. He's either dead wrong with his claims about being God's son, or he's dead right. Which way will you go?